Let's face it, marriage is an odd institution. It takes two individuals, having come from separate social, family, and cultural contexts, and binds them together in a single commitment, all while expected to stick to the demands and norms of both parties involved. Throughout the centuries, there have been some interesting and downright bizarre attempts at making marriage more meaningful or enforceable. From legal loopholes to blood sacrifices, here is a list of the top 10 most messed up marriage traditions in history. Be warned, some are truly outrageous. Bloodletting. Bloodletting is a practice where the groom has to shed blood before the wedding ceremony. This tradition is still prevalent in some parts of the world, where it is seen as a way of proving the groom's virility. This tradition is messed up because it often leads to the groom being physically harmed and could potentially spread blood-borne diseases. Bride kidnapping. Bride kidnapping is a tradition that has a long and storied past, with some forms still practiced in certain parts of the world today. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, bride kidnapping is an accepted, if not encouraged, part of life. Kyrgyzstan's interpretation of bride kidnapping involves abducting the future wife and taking her back to the prospective groom's family home. While abduction is illegal and can result in jail time, it's still practiced among groups who adhere to older traditions. The rationale? It's seen as a way to quicken the marriage process, cutting out any middleman, such as a marriage broker or negotiations with the bride's family. What's especially disturbing about Kyrgyzstan's interpretation of bride kidnapping is that some victims are young girls barely in their teens who are taken against their will. Fortunately, however, due to public pressure, criminal cases related to bride kidnappings have declined slightly over recent years. Ghost marriage. Ghost marriage is a practice where two deceased people are married to each other. This tradition is prevalent in some parts of the world, where it is seen as a way of preserving the family lineage. This tradition is messed up because it often leads to the exploitation of women's bodies, as they are often used as substitutes for the deceased bride. Currency of bride price. China's dowry practices. You may not know this, but China had some messed up marriage traditions that involved currency, specifically the bride price. In Chinese tradition, the groom's family would give money or property to the bride's family in exchange for her hand in marriage. This meant that women were essentially worth a certain amount, and they usually weren't treated as equals. This form of currency was called a dowry, and there were rules about how much money should be given depending on the circumstances. For example, if the bride was from a wealthier family, the groom's parents had to pay more for their son to marry her. If a man didn't have enough to pay for his bride, his family often borrowed money or worked harder to save up more. The shocking part? The dowry only stayed with the bride's family. She couldn't keep it if she left her husband or divorced him. It could be seen as an incentive for staying in an unhappy marriage, which is pretty messed up. Polygamy. Polygamy is a practice where a man has multiple wives. This practice is still prevalent in some parts of the world, where it is seen as a sign of wealth and status. However, this tradition is messed up because it often leads to abuse and neglect of the wives and their children. Blood money. Blood money is a practice where a man who has committed a crime, such as murder, is allowed to marry the victim's family member as a way of compensating them for their loss. This tradition is still prevalent in some parts of the world, where it is seen as a way of avoiding punishment. This tradition is messed up because it often leads to the victim's family being forced into marriage against their will. Levirate marriages. The biblical origin. Another bizarre way of organizing marriages is the levirate marriage. The practice originates from the book of Deuteronomy in the Bible, and it has been around for centuries. The Bible's rules. According to the Bible, if a man dies without any children, his brother should marry his widow and have a child with her for the deceased brother. This might sound messed up to us, but back then it was considered an ancient form of social security, guaranteeing that the woman would be taken care of economically and that her husband's family line wouldn't be lost. Legalities across cultures. The exact rules of levirate marriage have varied across different cultures and religions across history. In some cases, it was a voluntary arrangement, whereas in others it wasn't. Some cultures have also stipulated that women must remain faithful to their deceased husband's memory or else they will face punishment. Thankfully, today we don't need to follow those outdated rules anymore. Wives for sale, arranged marriages in Thailand. Number 8 on our list of messed up marriage traditions throughout history takes us to Thailand, where arranged marriages in which the woman acts as a commodity is still an all too common occurrence. In this tradition, a girl's parents may decide to sell their daughter as a wife to another family. The amount of money or dowry paid by the buying family will often depend on the daughter's education, beauty, and age. This practice is unfortunately still quite prevalent in many rural parts of Thailand. Pathway to financial security. Some families see this tradition as a pathway for their daughters to gain financial security and stability. After all, if her husband has money, then she won't have to worry about providing for herself and potentially her family in the future. This doesn't even take into account that traditionally in Thailand, the husband provides food, shelter, and clothing. Marriage by proxy. Marriage by proxy is a practice where two people are married without meeting each other. This tradition is still prevalent in some parts of the world, where it is seen as a way of avoiding the dowry system. This tradition is messed up because it often leads to forced marriages and lack of compatibility between the spouses. Child marriage. Child marriage is a practice where young girls are married off before they reach puberty. This practice is still prevalent in some parts of the world, where girls are seen as a financial burden to their families. This tradition is messed up because it often leads to health complications and psychological trauma for the child bride. Witch brides thrown into fires. Ancient European traditions. The 10th and final item on our list of messed up marriage traditions in history is one that you really don't want to believe happened. Witch brides thrown into fires. Yes, ancient European history had an outrageous tradition that involved throwing supposed witches into the middle of a bonfire as part of a marriage ceremony. If a woman was accused of being a witch or having magical powers, she would be tried, found guilty, and then tied to an upright stake in the center of a bonfire. Her fiancé would then have to light the fire and watch her burn alive in order to be deemed worthy enough to marry her. This cruel act was believed to rid the woman of her evil powers and ensure a successful marriage. Needless to say, this practice was outlawed centuries ago. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. Conclusion. It's clear that marriage traditions from around the world have changed drastically from the past. While some customs may make sense today, others may seem completely outdated. Whether it's arranged marriage, selling a daughter, or finding a groom for not having enough money, these archaic traditions are sure to make you question the validity of modern customs. From bizarre to downright bizarre, these 10 marriage traditions provide an interesting look into the past of marriage rituals. While some of these traditions have withstood the changing times, others have been left in the dust. Either way, it's safe to say that marriage has come a long way since these days.